We move
Yeah.
on to the next session, which is going to, the moderator is going to be Manikandan Venkatramanan, and the topic is quite long. It says named trained in US from chiefs to limiteds, America's streamliner era of the passenger trains. Quite complicated, but should be quite interesting. So I'll just introduce the moderator to you. Manikandan Venkatramanan is a finance and risk management professional who has obtained his Chartered Financial Analyst CFA and Financial Risk Manager FRM charter. He did his MS in finance from the University of Pittsburgh. In addition, he is an alumnus of the Indian Institute of Management, Bengaluru. He is currently in the consulting industry. An avid rail fan and an active and passionate member of the Rail Enthusiast Society, he is interested in reading about the past and present of railroading, its operations and technology. He serves as a director of the UK based World Alliance of Tourist Trams and Trains, where he represents India. He is also a member of the UK based Advanced Steam Traction Trust. He connects and liaises with various railroad associations in the US. Above all, he is an active member of the Rail Enthusiast Society. Over to you, Manik Nandan.
Thank you very much, Manojji, and thank you for such a wonderful introduction. And I'd like to thank all the this August Association for giving me this opportunity to moderate the session today. The speaker for today is Mr. Bob LaPrelle. Let me share my screen so that you have an image of him. Yeah, the speaker for today is Mr. Robert LaPrelle. He has more than 30 years of experience in the field of historic railway preservation and in the domain of museums. He has served as the executive director and CEO of the Museum of the American Railroad at Frisco in Texas since 1988 and 3 prior years as a board trustee. He's a very good friend of mine. I have had the pleasure and opportunity of interacting with him on multitude of occasions. He always places emphasis on the cultural history and the technology aspects of the museum with outreach programs to the local communities to give education and expand the knowledge of railroading in the United States and the role in building communities. He recently led the successful effort to move the museum to a significantly larger venue at Frisco in Texas, and he has also been very instrumental in expanding the collections of the museum and to serve a broader audience. He is currently managing the effort to expand the museum's facilities, including 12,000 feet of exhibit tracks, a covered pavilion for new rolling stock and permanent exhibit buildings. I have had the pleasure of visiting the museum myself. It is already one of the best museums in southern United States. Upon completion, I certainly believe it will be one of the premier transportation history and technology centers in southwestern United States. He's a resident of Dallas in Texas. He attended the University of Texas at Austin, majoring in government and public policy, including internships at the Lyndon B. Johnson School, a presidential library, and the museum. His various accolades include serving as a past president of the Association of Railway Museums, the past president of the Heritage Railway Alliance in the US, and he is also currently the president of the London-based World Alliance of Tourist Trams and Trains, WWII. So with this, I would like to hand it over to Bob. I'll share my screen, Bob, and then you can see it accordingly.
I don't see him among the audience.
Is that under the name Kelly Murphy?
Yeah, sorry.
I thought so.
Sorry.
I'm on my wife's computer. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
That's more of an Irish name. Okay. Manny, thank you very much for that introduction. I appreciate that. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be returning to speak to your group. When I was made aware of the topic, famous passenger trains, I was thrilled because this is an area that I really enjoy. It's one of those little subgroups of railroad history here in the U.S. that's a very exciting and varied history of our nation's trains.
Okay.
Sorry about that. It's been automatically muting for some reason. Okay, we'll keep an eye on that. So anyway, when I was asked to present on some of the famous trains running in the United States, I was thrilled because this is a favorite subject of mine. I built this PowerPoint presentation in just a couple of days, and I do apologize for the quality of some of the photographs that I grabbed off the web. This is going to be a pretty broad brush of famous trains, but we'll go very quickly, and it's very visual, so I think you'll all will enjoy this. So here we go. Next slide, Manny. Okay, that's the title slide. So really, you can split the era of great passenger trains kind of into two different areas. One is the pre-World War II era of what they call the heavyweight passenger trains, the large carbon steel cars built by the Pullman Company that weighed 150 tons, were powered by steam, some electric locomotives, but mainly steam. And then the years leading up to the Second World War and the post-war era, where you had the beautiful diesel electric powered streamliners. And we'll talk a little bit about the technology as well as the trains. Okay, next slide. So we'll go back a little bit to the 1930s and early 1940s when steam was kind of in its last vestige in the United States. And there was a lot of competition to increase the patronage on a lot of these trains, make them faster, have more amenities. And that led to a lot of innovation that ultimately led to the streamliner and diesel-powered era. Next. This is very typical of a train car in the teens in 1920s in the United States. There were three principal builders, mainly the Pullman Company in Chicago. Then you had the American Car and Foundry Company, and you had the St. Louis Car Company and a few other builders. Pullman absorbed a lot of them back in the early 1900s and consolidated them into their manufacturing. But this is very typical of a car that was used in the 1920s. This is actually a Pullman sleeping car that's in our collection. This is the Glen Nevis. It's an all first class private room car. In this photo, it's in front of downtown Dallas for National Train Day, I think sometime about 2005. Next slide. And this was typical of the final gestation of steam power in the United States. This is called a Super Hudson. The Hudson wheel arrangement was named after the New York Central's line that ran along the Hudson River. This locomotive was built in the mid-20s. It's capable in excess of 100 miles per hour, pulling some of their famous trains like the Lakeshore Limited and the 20th Century Limited. These were fast, graceful, beautiful locomotives that were really the epitome of superpower steam towards the end of that era. Next. And the Hudsons ran along the waterfront into New York. These two trains were arch competitors during that pinnacle of the steam era in the 1920s and early 1930s. This is actually the 20th century, the New York Central's 20th Century Limited on the right, departing Chicago, and the train to the left is the Pennsylvania Railroad's Broadway Limited. And when they departed different stations in Chicago, they raced each other out of that city on the way to New York. This is around Englewood, just outside of Chicago. And it was when these trains were on time, which was about 99% of the time, they literally raced out of Chicago. But the New York Central would take what's called the water level route along the Great Lakes through upstate New York and Albany and down into Manhattan. The Pennsylvania Railroad took a shorter route, but through the mountains, through the Allegheny Mountains and along Horseshoe Curve into New York from a more mountainous direction. But a fantastic picture of the two. Okay, next one. So this is the New York Central's Hudsons as they began to streamline these locomotives. As they're getting more into the 1930s, late 1930s, they began to make these locomotives much more graceful and beautiful through streamlining. They were very difficult to service, but they were beautiful machines. This one was designed by Henry Dreyfuss, one of the great industrial designers in the US. Next. Just a couple of other examples of streamlining that was applied to steam locomotives. This is the Lehigh Valley Railroad, a very interesting example of streamlining on one of their locomotives. So they're beginning to get more into that streamlined era, even with conventional steam. Next. Another example, this is New York Central's Mercury. This is in Chicago at LaSalle Street Station as the train pulls out of the station on the New York Central route. Next. Okay, and then the next slide, please. So these are some of the earliest streamliners. The Budd Company, which was famous for large steel stampings and making auto body parts, started getting into the design and manufacture of rail cars. They were one of the upstarts in the industry. And about the same time, Pullman was developing their first streamlined train. This is called the M10,000, which was eventually used by the Union Pacific Railroad. And they introduced this just months before Budd had introduced their version of a streamliner. They were in competition with each other to launch the first ones, but Pullman got theirs out months in advance. The M10,000 was actually made out of fabricated aluminum and made quite a splash when it was introduced. Next slide. And it had a very interesting ending on the rearmost car. Almost like a bullet. Incredibly innovative at the time. But again, it was made out of aluminum, and that would actually be a problem down the road with these trains from the standpoint of corrosion. But it was a very lightweight crafted vehicle. Next slide. So a few months later, the Budd Company introduced their version of a streamliner, and it was radical. It was just absolutely cutting edge, not only from styling, but from a manufacturing and materials standpoint. The Budd Company chose to build theirs out of stainless steel. And it was almost entirely of stainless steel, even the frame. And they went to a design called shot welding, where all of the components were spot welded together. So you had one unitized body made out of a corrosion-resistant material that was not riveted or screwed together. It was welded together. That's greatly sped up the manufacturing process and made for an extremely strong, lightweight shell. And then they put the original engine was the Winton 201, which would evolve into a two-cycle diesel in later production items. So the original Zephyr, called the Pioneer Zephyr, just took the nation by storm, and it set the land speed record between Chicago and Denver by rail on its inaugural run. So it was just groundbreaking and kind of eclipsed the M10,000 once it was introduced. Next slide. And the Pioneer Zephyr is now, the entire train with some additional cars that were added in its lifetime is now on display at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. You can actually walk through the train, beautifully preserved. So it survives even to this day. And it was retired in the 1960s and it was introduced in 1933. So it had a long service career. Okay. This is a interior of one of the observation cars on one of the Zephyr trains. Beautiful interiors, reflected the Art Deco period. And interestingly, the M10,000 suffered from so much corrosion and became obsolete within years of its introduction because the technology just wasn't up to what the Budd produced trains were. And the M10,000 ended up being scrapped for the war effort. It didn't even get preserved. Next. A nice side-by-side comparison of the two trains. This is in Kansas City. Union Pacific and Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy both served Kansas City. So this gives you a nice comparison of the two trains. Very interesting designs on both of them. Next. And at the same time, the Pennsylvania Railroad, who had been electrifying their lines between Washington and Philadelphia and Harrisburg and New York, had developed some electric locomotives that were very advanced for the time. This is one of the many GG1 electrics that were produced in their Juniata shops on the Pennsylvania Railroad. We have one of these locomotives in our collection, number 49-6 is actually displayed. But so on the eastern trains, particularly on the Pennsylvania Railroad, you had electric locomotive technology advancing very quickly and taking on a streamlined look as well. The GG1s were designed by Raymond Loewy, who was one of the great industrial designers of the time. And I think this train is called the Congressional. Next. Okay, so some of the early lightweight streamline construction here is represented, and we'll talk a little bit about how it got started. When the Budd Company introduced the Zephyr trains, that design was quickly translated into a non-articulated train set, conventional rail cars that were not articulated and shared trucks. This is one of the early versions of a typical traditional railroad passenger car, a single unit car built by the Budd Company. This is called a pre-war Budd. It was built about 1939. This is a dining car used on the Burlington Railroad. And this became the standard for the design for Budd stainless steel shot welded unitized passenger cars. And they would build thousands of these cars. This is one of the earliest ones in existence. Next. And the Budd cars, the Budd Company, their Red Lion plant, which is outside of Philadelphia, had more of an assembly line process. Not only was Budd new to the rail car building industry, but they also were very innovative in the assembly methods and got more into an assembly line design, where the Pullman Company was used to building wood-bodied cars and had to kind of transform itself into building all steel cars and then getting into lightweight cars. Budd Company was way ahead of them in assembly methods because they had been building automotive bodies for Chrysler and some of the other automotive manufacturers and were much more up to date in their methods of building rail cars. What really put Budd in the forefront, though, is they had patented the shot welded stainless steel design, and Pullman could not replicate that as an assembly method. They had to rivet their cars, they had to screw their cars together, they could not do shot welding, and that really put Pullman at a disadvantage when they got into building lightweight cars. Okay, next. Some of the other competitors' products, though, this is a Pullman, and it's an observation car off the Missouri, Kansas, Texas Railroad's Texas Special, one of the famous trains. And that while they could still use the what they call the corrugated skin on the cars, again, it could not be welded on. It was screwed on, and it also was called it was not fluting. It was a different type of skin than Budd was using. The skin on a Budd car, the fluting was actually inserted into grooves and popped in. This was mechanically fastened. Okay, next. And finally, the Budd Company took their standard car body design and put cabs at both ends and put diesel engines underneath it and made a self-propelled version of their standard stainless steel car body design. These are called RDCs, rail diesel cars, and they had two Detroit diesels underneath it, and they could run in either direction, completely self-propelled. These were introduced in the mid-1950s, and they were operated on lightly traveled branch lines. They were inexpensive to operate. You could run them singularly, or you could run 10 of them together if you wanted to. They could run in multiple units, and they were very efficient to operate from a crew standpoint as well. They only took a motorman or an engineer and maybe one person inside acting as a conductor and a trainman. So they cut down on operating costs and staffing costs greatly, and these were immensely popular in the 1950s and 1960s. Next. Okay, so when you start getting into the diesel technology, you had another revolution really in the industry. The Budd car was doing it with passenger coaches, whereas another company, an upstart company, was doing it with diesel locomotives, and that was the electromotive division of General Motors. The very first diesel electric locomotives weren't very stylish. They were cutting edge inside with their diesel electric technology and two-cycle engines, but the outsides were still very boxy. This is one of the first transcontinental use diesel locomotives on the Santa Fe line. These were called Amos and Andy. They kind of got a nickname, but they weren't very graceful on the outside. They tried to style them, but as you can see, they were not really taking a graceful shape yet, although all the technology did lie underneath it. Next. So that would transform into what a lot of people would regard as one of the most beautiful diesel electric locomotive designs ever conceived. General Motors would take the insides of the one you saw previously, and their styling department came up with this beautiful streamlined car body design that would be applied to just about every railroad in the United States. And everyone had their own paint scheme. In fact, a lot of the railroads that ordered these locomotives would have General Motors styling department come up with a paint scheme that was unique for that particular railroad. This one ran on the Atlantic coastline along the eastern United States. This, I think, is an E6, I believe. And the E-type locomotives had two engines, two V12 engines in them, and 6 axles. Okay, next. So they refined it even more, and they were called the F units and the E units. Okay, next slide. So this is an electromotive demonstrator set for the F7 type locomotives. This was a model that was introduced about 1949. The F7s had 4 axles each and could run in pairs or in 3s and 4s. And they were used mainly in freight service, although some of the other railroads used them in passenger service as well. Okay, next. And then this is a demonstrator set for the, I believe this is an E8. And this is a passenger locomotive. This is the one that has the 2 V12s. The F units had a single V16 2-cycle engine. The E's had 2 12-cylinder V-type 2-cycle engines, and these could also run in multiple units. And then you would get into the booster units. This is an F7 booster, and again, you could permanently couple these and run as many of these units in MU consists that you needed. Santa Fe would run 4 of these together. They would run an A, B, B, A set, but this is one of the B units that they operated. Okay, next. And then you could also do the same thing with the E units. You could run a B unit in the E8 or E9 model designation. And Union Pacific was purchased a number of B units for their passenger locomotives. This one is, I think, dated about 1955. But these were very popular to provide additional horsepower, additional tractive effort on high-speed passenger trains. One of the variants of the E unit car body was the custom-built E5s for the Burlington Railroad, Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. It's essentially an E6 inside, but it has a 100% stainless steel car body on the outside to match the Budd stainless steel trains. You can even see the fluting along the side. These are beautiful locomotives, very graceful. These pulled the Texas Zephyr. This is actually in Dallas, Texas. And this is a locomotive that pulled the Texas Zephyr, one of the famous trains in and out of Dallas, and going up to Denver, Colorado. Next. Okay. And some of the other diesel builders in the passenger era were, next, American Locomotive Company, or ALCO. This was their answer to the E units, the E6s and E7s. A rather homely looking version. This is called a DL109, produced by ALCO. Not nearly as attractive. The Santa Fe paint scheme that you see there was actually developed by General Motors. It looks much better on Santa Fe's E units than they looked on the DL109s. Okay, next. But ALCO finally got it right several years later when they introduced the PA series passenger locomotives. This is a PA1. This locomotive is actually preserved in our museum. It's undergoing restoration right now. So the PAs were much more graceful than the DL109s and graced a lot of passenger trains throughout the United States. They were not near as popular as the EMD's E units, but they they were beautiful locomotives. This is taken in San Diego, California. Next. Another builder of passenger locomotives during the Streamliner era was Fairbanks Morse. This is on the New Haven line. Fairbanks Morse, they developed an engine for use in submarines during World War II. It's an opposed piston engine, had two crankshafts, one at the top of the engine block and one at the bottom, and then two opposed pistons in line. A very tall engine, a very well-made engine that was very reliable, but Fairbanks Morse never could really gain a foothold in the market. Those engines were developed for submarines, and they only had limited success in the railroad industry. They had some problems with those engines because they idled too much in railroad service, whereas on a submarine they were running all the time. So Fairbanks Morse didn't get much traction in the passenger locomotive industry, particularly during the Streamline era. Next. And then the Baldwin Locomotive Works, of course, is known for steam locomotives, one of the biggest and finest builders of steam locomotives in the US and other places in the world. Got into the diesel business, didn't really do well either. This is a locomotive, it's called a centipede because of so many wheels it has on it. And it has two inline 8-cylinder engines, and they were heavy, they were cumbersome, maintenance intensive, and Baldwin just couldn't compete with the likes of EMD, some of the products that they were putting out at a much lesser cost. And so you didn't see a lot of Baldwin locomotives during the Streamline passenger era. This is one of the rare ones, and none of these exist today. Next. Okay, and next. So now we're just going to kind of look at some of these trains that, these great name trains that operated, particularly after the Second World War. The Wabash Railroad served St. Louis and other points east in the United States. This is a very typical of their paint scheme used on the EMD-E units of the time. They ran trains known as the Wabash Cannonball, for which songs have been written, as well as the Banner Blue, and some of the other trains were very famous on the Wabash Railroad. Next. Illinois Central, also known as the main line of Mid-America. They ran several trains up and down the corridor between New Orleans on the Gulf of Mexico and all the way up to Chicago. They also ran several passenger trains through the heartland of America, Illinois, Iowa, all down through Mississippi. This is at Chicago's famous Central Station. And I believe this is either the Miamian or this could be the city of New Orleans about ready to depart Chicago on a cold wintry day. You can see the clock tower and the big neon sign for a Central Station for the Illinois Central Railroad. A song was written about this train as well. It kind of has, it's kind of an American icon. Next. The Louisville and Nashville Railroad, which ran out of Nashville and Indianapolis and some of these other stations, had some very famous trains. It got absorbed into, I believe, Norfolk and Western, and eventually, I believe Manny, you may have to correct me here. I think they got absorbed into the Southern Railway, or it could have been the Seaboard.
Yes, that's correct, Bob. They were merged into the Southern system, and they became Norfolk Southern after being absorbed in Norfolk.
Good, thank you. You know that stuff. I'm impressed. Okay, next slide. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, yet another customer of EMD for the E-unit type locomotives. They ran some wonderful trains through Cincinnati, West Virginia, and into Washington, D.C. Included in some of those C&O trains, I believe, was the, I'm trying to think some of the names of those trains. I think there was the George Washington, but the C&O served Washington, D.C. and was kind of a companion road to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. But they had a beautiful paint scheme on their locomotives. Next. The New York Central line, mainly out of New York, running along upstate through Albany, Rensselaer, and then along the Great Lakes through Schenectady, Syracuse, Toledo, Ohio, and all the way to Chicago. They also had many trains operating out of in New York State, out of New York, This is the 20th Century Limited, which was their most famous train, operating behind, I believe those are E7s, and it's running along the Hudson River, somewhere between Albany and New York City right now. Very fast train. These trains ran 90 and 100 miles an hour along the waterfront, what they call the raceway along the Hudson River. Next. The Seaboard Railroad, which operated trains from New York down to Florida, had one particular train called the Orange Blossom Special. I believe this is an E3, very handsome paint scheme, beautiful scheme with some interesting color combinations. But the Seaboard Railroad was famous for running up and down the East Coast. Technically, it was called the Seaboard Airline. It ended up being merged with Atlantic Coastline, which was one of their competitors that shared parallel routes, and they ended up being the Seaboard Coastline, which is now part of what is it? CSX? I think it's CSX.
It's CSX, yes, it's CSX.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. And something closer to my home, the Missouri, Kansas, Texas Railroad operated trains 1 and 2, the Texas Special. This was their flagship train. It operated between San Antonio, Texas, Dallas, and St. Louis. And it had a section that went to Kansas City. And the Texas Special was really a beautiful train that was well known, operating in and out of Dallas here at my home, and operated until 1965 when it was taken out of service. I think this is an E7 locomotive set as it was being delivered from EMD at their LaGrange, Illinois plant. Next. And the Southern Railway operated principally between New Orleans, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. It ran in the eastern part of the U.S. Their famous train was the Crescent, which was actually emblazoned on the front of these locomotives. Very famous train that kind of had a Southern flair to it. Interestingly, the Southern Railway chose not to join Amtrak in 1971. They continued to operate the trains on their own, but they would eventually join Amtrak, and the Southern Crescent still operates today. Next. The Missouri Pacific Lines and its companion road, the Texas and Pacific Lines, had a number of streamliners. This is the Colorado Eagle that operated on the Missouri Pacific Railroad. Beautiful train. I think these are EMD E7s. And they had a dome car that they actually shared with the Illinois Central Railroad on a seasonal basis, which is kind of interesting. The Missouri Pacific also served from El Paso through Dallas all the way to Texarkana, Texas, up to St. Louis and down to New Orleans, with a few intermediate lines along those routes as well. Next. Okay, we get into the vacation trains, and these are the post-war trains that were really designed to lure passengers away from other modes of travel when there was a lot of competition to fly and travel the interstate highways. And probably chief among the vacation trains was the California Zephyr. Very well known, a very beloved train, introduced in 1949, and it was operated by 3 railroads. It ran between Chicago and Oakland, California, by way of Denver and Salt Lake. And the railroads shared the equipment pool. They each bought 1/3 of the equipment necessary to run, I think it was 4 trains at a time, operating simultaneously to have daily service between Chicago and the West Coast. This is the Burlington's version of it, leaving Chicago Union Station. And it was a beautiful train. It was a fixed consist, just a magnificent train. It's all Bud equipment with all EMD motive power. Next. So the Burlington operated the train between Chicago and Denver, Colorado, and then the consist was handed off to the Rio Grande Railroad, which operated it from Denver to Salt Lake. And this is the Rio Grande operating their portion of the train. It always had 4 dome cars. It had, actually 5 dome cars, I'm sorry. It had 4 Vista Dome coaches, and then at the rear of the train, it had a dome observation car. And the dome seating was unreserved. That was not revenue space. That was strictly unreserved space for passengers to have a better view of the scenery. And we'll talk about those in a moment. Next. And this is the third leg of the California Zephyr route between Salt Lake City and Oakland, California, with a direct connection to San Francisco. The Western Pacific was the other operator of the California Zephyr. And you get a better idea of the domes all in a line there. And each one of them just had beautiful paint schemes. It was really a gorgeous train, very well patronized all the way up through the 1970s. Next. Just an interior view of one of the dome cars. This is actually taken out of one of their promotional brochures inside the dome. Next. Another famous train, and the vacation trains are mainly, running out west, between Chicago and points west. This is the Empire Builder, operated by the Great Northern Railroad. And this took a northerly route where the California Zephyr took a route right through the Rockies via Denver. The Great Northern's Empire Builder took a more northerly route up through North Dakota, Montana, and out that direction. Beautiful train, left Chicago Union Station and arrived in Seattle 2 days later. It also had dome cars. Next. And then there was another train that ran parallel to the Empire Builder by another railroad. This is the North Coast Limited that operated on the Northern Pacific Railroad, took a little bit more of a southerly route, but more parallel to the Empire Builder. It also went to Seattle, and I think there was a section to Portland. This is at King Street Station in Seattle, Washington. Beautiful train. This paint scheme was designed by Roman Laurie. Next. And then there was the Super Chief, the Santa Fe Railway's flagship train that operated between Chicago and Los Angeles via Kansas City and Albuquerque and through Arizona. And this was an all first-class premier train that the Santa Fe operated. This is going across a bridge in California. And some people say that the Super Chief was the epitome of all streamliners. Santa Fe really ran a class operation with their train. Next.
Bob, just a small time check. We have 10 more minutes.
Okay, very good. Union Pacific's City of Los Angeles that operated between Chicago via Salt Lake into California. Okay, we'll kind of speed it up here a little bit. Next. And Southern Pacific's Sunset Limited, trains 1 and 2 between San Francisco, Tucson, El Paso, Houston, all the way to New Orleans. Okay. Next. And this is another Illinois Central train. I think this is the Cornhusker. I think this is in New Orleans. We're just barely scratching the surface of all these named passenger trains. Next. And then the Chesapeake in Ohio and Baltimore in Ohio actually left Grand Central Station in Chicago. They used the same station for their trains that went through the Virginias and into Washington with connections up into New York. Next. And then north of the border, you had the Canadian Pacific Line that ran a transcontinental train called the Canadian from Toronto all the way to Vancouver, British Columbia. Next. And then there was a counterpart that took a more northerly route through Banff. This is the Supercontinental that operated on the Canadian National Railroad. These covered some beautiful country. Next. Dome cars. Okay, next slide. So what really gained popularity on the Western trains, the vacation trains, was the advent of the dome car with the raised level. This is the prototype car that Burlington actually built in their shops. This was adapted from a standard coach and just cutting edge design. It was inspired by GM that actually came up with the concept because they wanted to have better view of the Rocky Mountains as some of the executives rode some of these trains that were powered by their locomotives. Next. little bit different view of the car. You can see that the domes had flat plate glass originally, and you can actually see where it was sort of fit into the roof line. Next. And then this was the production version of the dome, a lot smoother, curved glass, much more graceful look. And this is what Bud produced by the hundreds for the vacation trains all throughout the United States. It became the standard design. And you can see the side windows below the nameplate that says California Zephyr are smaller because the floor kind of encroached. You had to step down on the first floor, go under the dome, and then step back up to the other end of the first floor to allow for headroom. Next. So that version was also applied to the rearmost cars on the California Zephyr, to the observation cars. So really interesting design to have a dome observation car. And that's what graced the rear of all the California Zephyr train sets. Most of these cars have been preserved because they're so unique and beautiful. Next. And then Santa Fe did them one better. They had Bud build a full-length dome car. These were called the big domes, and they had a lounge underneath them called the turquoise room. Beautiful cars. And these graced several of their passenger trains, including the El Capitan and the Chief and the Texas Chief. Next slide. It's an interior view of the full-length domes. I used to ride in those cars as a kid. They were amazing. And believe it or not, they had incredible air conditioning even in the hottest of summers when you were underneath all that glass. Next. And the Great Northern Railway, for their Empire Builder, ordered some of the full-length domes from Bud as well. Next. And Union Pacific had another car builder build their dome cars. These were built by American Car and Foundry or the St. Louis Car Company. Little bit different design. They had the single pane side windows on the domes, where the Bud cars had double pane. Next. And on some of Union Pacific's dome cars, they made them dining cars, and you could actually dine up in the dome on some of their name trains, like the City of San Francisco and the City of Los Angeles. It's a beautiful promotional photograph there taken in the 1950s. Next. Northern Pacific bought domes from the Bud Company for their North Coast Limited to compete with Great Northern's route as well. Next. And Southern Pacific made their own dome cars. They took existing coaches and actually built these dome cars in their shops, which you can kind of tell it's a little bit homemade looking, but it worked. And they used it on some of their trains, including the Shasta Daylight and the Daylight passenger trains that SP operated out in California. Next. What's interesting about those cars is they had one end of the car where the lower level actually was under the dome, and then you would go up the stairs into the dome seating area that was raised. Kind of a unique design. Next. This is looking in the seating area of the same car. Next. All right, dining on these wonderful passenger trains was exquisite. Yeah, Kelly's giving me the 3-minute mark. The Northern Pacific had great dining cars on their North Coast Limited. This is just an interior view of that. We're just barely touching on dining because that could be a whole presentation by itself. Next. Union Pacific in the lower level of their dome diners, just taken probably in the 1950s. Beautiful dining. Next. And Santa Fe, underneath their pleasure domes, had a private dining room that guests could reserve and actually have private dinners under the dome. This was a pretty big deal. It's called the turquoise room on the Santa Fe's all first class Super Chief. Next. And just real quickly, this is our dining car at the museum. And even though it's not a lightweight car, it was used all the way up through the lightweight era of the Texas Special, because for some reason, the Katy didn't order enough dining cars to protect the consists for daily service. So this heavyweight car, built in 1937, ran on the Streamlined Texas Special. At the time, it was painted red. Next. There's just an interior view of our dining car. We do special events in there and so forth. Next. Okay, very quickly. We'll get into the high-level cars. In the 1950s, 1954, 55, Santa Fe developed through Budd innovation and design a double-decker rail car called the high-level. And these were used on, introduced on the El Capitan, which was an all-coach deluxe streamliner between Chicago and LA. Next. This is the El Capitan coming into Los Angeles, and you can see the high-level cars. They only built coaches, lounges, and diners, no sleepers, because the El Capitan was only a coach train. Next. This is the high-level lounge that had almost dome-type windows on it, but it was double-decker all the way from one end to the other. These were self-contained cars as well. They had diesel generators for power on each car. Very cutting edge at the time. Next. Another view of the high-level publicity view. Next. And this is inside the high-level lounge. These cars all exist today. They've been remarkably preserved. They were used by Amtrak up until just a few years ago. So they built in 55. They've had a long career, and they're now in private use. Next. All right. How are we doing, Manny? Want to run through this real quick? You want to shut it down here?
We still have 2 minutes, Bob. We can go
Okay.
through it really
So
quick.
just real quickly, we'll talk a little bit about the great stations that these streamlined passenger trains serve. This, of course, is Grand Central Station in New York, located in Midtown Manhattan. Many New York Central trains. This station was built by the New York Central. A lot of New York Central trains arrived and departed this station in New York, including the great 20th Century Limited. Next. This is the Pennsylvania Station in New York, also in Midtown Manhattan. Sadly, it was completely torn down, but this was a magnificent station, and this was the terminus for, among many trains, the terminus for the Broadway Limited between New York and Chicago. Next. An interior. This is a very famous interior view, wonderful photograph of the main concourse. All of this is gone now, but they actually did replicate it. This is Chicago Union Station, and this is the main building and concourse for Chicago Union Station. All the Burlington trains arrived and departed this station, as well as Pennsylvania Railroad trains from New York. Next. This is the interior of the concourse, a lot like Penn Station. This was all torn down. Chicago Union Station is still a vibrant rail station today, but the concourse was torn down in 1969. Okay. This is Grand Central Station in Chicago. There were 6 terminals in Chicago, and this is another one. This was torn down in 1969. All of the B&O, C&O trains arrived and departed in this station in Chicago. Next. And this is a view of the probably the National Limited with the train shed and the Grand Central Station tower in the background in Chicago. Next. Kansas City Union Station. Another midpoint for the Santa Fe and several railroads. Next. This station has been remarkably preserved today. You can actually go and see this magnificent interior of that station now. It's a cultural center today. Next. St. Louis Union Station, which every train that traveled east and west had to terminate at St. Louis, and you had to get on a different train. This was a huge terminal. Still exists today, beautifully restored and preserved. Next. Couple of interior views of St. Louis Union Station. It still looks this good today. It's magnificent. Next.
Perhaps we can cover the revival, Bob, and then close the presentation. I think we are almost. Maybe
Okay.
we can just take one more minute and then, yeah. I think you
Okay.
had a section on revival.
Yes. And there's the track diagram. There's Dallas Union Station. Okay. That's St. Louis. And then this is Dallas Union Station, where I live. This is a Santa Fe train behind the Dallas Union Station. LA Union Station, the western terminus of the Santa Fe line and Southern Pacific line. Built in 1939. Beautiful station. Still used today by Amtrak.
It's come, Dad.
And then I
Fine.
think there's like 2 more slides. So things got pretty bad before the advent of Amtrak. This is the Penn Central line after their bankruptcy. And then Amtrak took over in 1971. And what you have today is much more modern. And there's There's yeah, that was the last of the Santa Fe trains. So we're kind of get up into the modern days here. There we go. I think we're
The
close to
Amtrak.
the end here.
Yep. Yeah, this is the one you wanted to cover,
Yep.
right? Okay.
Okay. There's the last one. Amtrak just introduced this train just in the last year. So that brings us up to modern day. That was a very broad brush of streamlined passenger trains. This is Penn Station today. All right.
Okay, thank you so much, Bob. It was a panoramic view of the history of passenger railroading here, and I'm pretty sure the audience enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we just had to skip the last part, but we do have a lot of comments. We do have a lot of questions. So
Okay.
let me just take each one of them. Okay, Mr. Anand Venkateshwaran, one of the senior members of our Rail Enthusiast Society, a very knowledgeable, very erudite person. He has encouraged everyone to visit your museum at Frisco. He has commended the museum. It seems that he has visited it. He has mentioned that it's one of the best that he has ever seen. And he has seen
Thank
your
you.
outreach programs with the kids. And okay, the other question that we have from Mr. Anand Venkateshwaran is, what about the Hayawata?
The Hiawatha, yes, that is among the many trains that I just didn't get an opportunity to cover. But yes, that ran on the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific, known as the Milwaukee Road. Very stylish train, and a lot of those cars were built in their shops, like the Skyline tail car that was on it. Yes, I'll try to include that as I update this program.
Sure. Mr. Atulya Sinha has asked about the maximum speed of streamlined steam locos.
Some of those trains on the New York Central line ran 90 and 100 miles per hour. Yes, those J3A Hudsons, like the ones that we saw early on in the presentation, they had very tall drivers, and they were built for speed. And it was highly competitive along that route.
Okay. Then there is some conversation about the Bud Company. Do we have any trace of the original Bud Company in Philadelphia?
Well, they were known for a couple of innovations. One is they were one of the few companies making large steel stampings back in the 1930s. And when Chrysler was building all steel car bodies, they actually hired the Bud Company to make the roofs because they were one of the few suppliers that could make large steel stampings. And they began to be very innovative with steel work and shot welding and the use of stainless steel. They also developed the disc brake. The Bud Company developed the disc brake. Very innovative company. And when they got into the rail car building business, they just really made all the other builders look obsolete within just a few years. And that design, endures today. The Bud cars were preferred by Amtrak and lasted all the way up until the 2000s on Amtrak trains. It was known as the Heritage Fleet because they were so well built. And we have a number of Bud cars in our collection.
Okay. The next one is from Mr. Pankaj Prasad. He's talking about the Sunset Limited of Southern Pacific. Why did Southern Pacific designate Sunset Limited as LIM instead of a number in the timetables upon inauguration on November 1st, 1895?
I'm sorry. Why was it known as a limited?
Yes. Why was it called as a limited instead of calling the train with a train number? Why did they call it as Sunset Limited, as a limited, instead of calling it as a train number?
Limited in those days really denoted like first class accommodations and exclusiveness, as I understand it. That was what a limited was. And so even though it ran daily, and it runs tri-weekly today on Amtrak, but I think limited was there used to the Santa Fe ran a train called the California Limited in the same era, which ended up being the Super Chief. But I think that's where that name really came from.
Okay. We have one last question from Mr. Viraf. He's asking about the aero trains. Why they're just experimental?
So the aerotrain, I meant to include a slide of that. I need to put that in there. And I think he's referring to the one that was produced by General Motors that had cars that similar to like a bus, if I'm thinking of the correct aerotrain. Is that okay? Yeah, those just didn't do well. They were everybody that rode in them said they had a very harsh ride. They were very rough riding, and they were just too much, too little, too late. I think in the world of passenger trains, I have a marvelous picture of one. I'll have to include it, but they just didn't go over. It didn't work. There's
Thanks,
one in
Bob.
St. Louis that's been preserved.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much once again for such a wonderful presentation. We have got a lot of good feedback.
Good.
I think Ms. Jert Mary, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. I mean, she has commended your presentation very much.
Well, thank you. It was kind of a whirlwind tour. Sorry about the speed with which we did it, but I hope they enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you very much for your time once again, Bob. It was a wonderful presentation. We'll look forward to staying in touch, and we look forward to many more of such insights from you for the RES. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Manny.
Thank you. Over to you, Manoj.
Thank you, Manik, and thank you, Robert, for this wonderful presentation. Lots of period photographs, lovely photographs of stations one has not visited and one would like to visit. Great.